of bacteriological warfare is prohibited by international law. The Hague Conventions of 1899 and 1907 expressly prohibit the employment of poisonous weapons. Clause 1 of Article 23 of the Hague Convention of 1907 specifically forbids all nations to employ poison or poisonous weapons. Clause 5 of the same article forbids nations to employ arms, projectiles, or materials calculated to cause unnecessary suffering. These rules of international law apply without doubt to the prohibition of bacteriological weapons today. The protocol for the prohibition of the use in war of asphyxiating poisonous or other gases and of bacteriological methods of warfare, which was signed at Geneva on June 17, 1925, is still more specific in prohibiting the employment of bacteriological weapons. The protocol stipulated the high contracting parties, so far as they are not already parties to treaties prohibiting such use, accept this prohibition, agree to extend this prohibition to the use of bacteriological methods of warfare, and agree to be bound as between themselves according to the terms of the declaration. 42 countries signed this protocol. Among the big powers who signed, only the governments of the United States and Japan failed to ratify it. In 1949, the military tribunal at Khabarovsk, USSR, publicly tried 12 former members of the Japanese armed forces and convicted them of preparing and employing bacteriological weapons. During World War II, the Japanese fascists set up special plants in the vicinity of Harbin and Changchun in northeast China for research into and manufacture of bacteriological weapons. Many Chinese and Soviet citizens were used as victims of experiments with bacteriological weapons by fascist Japanese armed forces. Lest their monstrous crimes be exposed, Japanese bacteriological war criminals destroyed these plants at the time of their defeat. But they did not succeed in escaping the verdict of the Khabarovsk military tribunal. The Second World Peace Congress met in Warsaw in November 1950. At this Congress, the peoples of all countries indicated their resolve to defend world peace by acting in unison. This was their answer to the plots, hysteria, and criminal actions of the war instigators after World War II, who are again threatening the peace and security of mankind. To defend world peace and reaffirm their determination to prohibit criminal weapons, representatives of 80 countries at the Congress unanimously adopted a resolution which solemnly declared the demand of the world's people for unconditional prohibition of all types of atomic, bacteriological, chemical, poisonous, and radioactive weapons and all other means of mass destruction. Denunciation as a war criminal of that government which henceforth is the first to use these weapons. The United States government has long made preparations for conducting bacteriological warfare. It has spared no efforts since World War II in propagating the criminal ideas of bacteriological warfare through various reactionary publications. The publication Science Digest even used "Epidemics Made to Order" as a title for one of its articles, which also carried an illustration showing U.S. aircraft on the point of releasing a hypothetical germ bomb over a peaceful city. The magazine Life printed charts and diagrams depicting various types of bacteriological weapons, germs employed against human beings, livestock, and plants. Another illustration of a hypothetical character appearing in this magazine is a submarine in the process of spreading germ mist. The caption below reads, "Biological Warfare." A cartoon with the caption "Bacteriological Weapons Mock at Atomic Weapons" appears in the magazine Newsweek. It boasts fantastically of the striking power of the bacteriological weapon. This is Theodore Roseberry, U.S. bacteriologist, who took an active part in setting up the military laboratory charged with manufacturing bacteriological weapons. In January 1947, he published in the American Journal of Immunology an article on bacteriological warfare and 13 other treatises on the subject. This is G.W. Merck, former chairman of the U.S. Army Chemical Warfare Service. In 1946, with the approval of the U.S. government, he released a long report in which he revealed that as early as 1941, the U.S. government had established special institutions to conduct research and manufacture bacteriological weapons systematically and on a large scale. On the basis of these revelations, we know that germ plants exist in many places in the United States. There are laboratories for experimenting with germs at a point near Washington, D.C., at Pascagoula, Mississippi, at Dugway, Utah, and also at a big production unit situated at Vigo, Indiana. A great number of Nazi experts in bacteriological warfare and 18 Japanese bacteriological war criminals are taking an active part in such research work. Camp Detrick, near Washington, D.C., equipped with large-scale laboratories and plants, is the center of operations where the United States perfected its preparations for bacteriological warfare. During World War II, more than 3,900 people were employed at Camp Detrick. Shiro Ishii, chief Japanese bacteriological war criminal, took part in this criminal undertaking of the U.S. government. According to reports in the American Reference Journal, Facts on File, for 1947, Truman withdrew the Geneva Protocol of 1925 from consideration by the U.S. Senate on April 8, 1947. In July 1949, the Soviet Union proposed that all governments which failed to ratify the Geneva Protocol should immediately do so, but mainly owing to the obstruction of the United States, the proposal was not adopted. Should it become necessary, the bacteriological weapon will be used. This is a statement made by former U.S. Secretary of Defense James Forrestal on March 12, 1949, when he boasted of an extensive U.S. plan for the waging of bacteriological warfare. The American magazine Newsweek, in its April 9, 1951 issue, reported that U.S. Landing Craft Infantry number 1091, commanded by Crawford F. Sams, chief of the Public Health and Welfare Section under the so-called United Nations Command, steamed into Wonsan Harbor, Korea, and carried off a number of Chinese on whom experiments involving plague were performed. Later, this vessel sailed to Koji Island and carried out experiments on captured personnel of the Korean People's Army. 3,000 tests were made each day. In the January 27, 1952 issue of the U.S. Army paper Stars and Stripes, Brigadier General William E. Creasy, chief of the U.S. Army Chemical Corps Research Command, was quoted as stating in Washington, D.C. on January 25th that germs, gas, and radioactive materials might prove to be the cheapest weapon for conquering the enemy without destruction of his economy. 5 days earlier, Brigadier General Charles E. Laux, Deputy Chief of the U.S. Army Chemical Corps Research Command, had made a similar statement. The U.S. government is producing what it calls the cheapest weapon on a mass scale. The American magazine Look, on July 29, 1952, carried an article entitled, "Must We Fear Germ Warfare?" It reveals that at least 5 U.S. government institutions are fully engaged in artificial cultivation of germs. These are the U.S. Army Chemical Section, the U.S. Public Health Administration, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the U.S. Army Health Section, and the U.S. Navy Health section. This article also states that whether for defense or offense, the United States must conduct research and make large-scale preparation for bacteriological warfare. Obviously, what they call defense is only a flimsy pretext. Attack on others, this is the real aim of the U.S. government. On the basis of a large mass of evidence, there is every reason to believe that the United States government has long prepared, materially and psychologically, to commit the crime of bacteriological warfare, to save itself from defeat in its aggressive war against the Korean people, and to try to achieve what it could not achieve in the Korean armistice negotiations. That is the chief reason why it has resorted desperately to bacteriological warfare in Korea and China. Under the hammer blows of the People's Forces of Korea and China, the aggressive U.S. armed forces are suffering serious defeats on the Korean battlefield. The heroes of the Korean People's Army and the Chinese People's Volunteers are constantly adding new fighting records to the victories already achieved. On the battlefield, side by side with corpses of American soldiers, lie heaps of the interventionists' much vaunted military equipment. This is the fate that Truman's model troops have met on the Korean front. History proves that fascist aggressors must meet with defeat. The American militarists should remember that this was the fate of Hitler, Mussolini, and Tojo. As a result of repeated fiascos, both political and military, the American interventionists were forced to enter into truce talks with us in Korea. While the truce talks are in progress, the American troops are using various methods to attack Korean civilians and lay waste their peaceful villages and cities. Their atrocities have become increasingly savage. Look, this is a Korean civilian seared and scarred by an American napalm bomb. The American forces are further using poison gas. But the American government does not stop at these criminal atrocities alone. It has gone further to undermine international law completely by using bacteriological weapons, which are strictly prohibited by international law, in an attempt to exterminate the Korean people and challenge the people of the whole world. Since the beginning of 1952, the American aggressors have repeatedly spread large quantities of germ-infected insects and other virulent objects both at the front and in the rear of the Korean People's Army and the Chinese People's Volunteers. This is a germ bomb dropped by U.S. aircraft in the rear of our troops in Korea. Alan Winnington, correspondent of the London Daily Worker, records the evidence of the crime. The inhabitants of Obongni District, Cheolsan County, North Pyongan Province, described to investigators how U.S. aircraft spread germs over the locality. One of them says, on the evening of February 27th, an American military airplane, flying low, circled overhead several times. This aroused my suspicion. I went with this old man to see. Right at this spot, we found swarms of flies, spiders, and mosquitoes crawling. The old man who went with him that evening adds, the flies were different from ordinary ones. Their body, mouth, and legs are longer. They both say with certainty that these insects were dropped from American planes.
그 발도 길고 몸뚱이가 다 깁니다. 그래서 이상한 사람은 우리 그 다리를 그 눈에 올라간 사람이 잡았습니다.
This Chinese volunteer describes how the Americans at the front fired germ shells into the volunteers' lines. The Epidemic Prevention Corps scours the area for germ-infected objects dropped by U.S. aircraft. They have collected mice and other animals, medicinal powder and tablets, canned food, biscuits, chewing gum, cigarettes, socks, cotton, pork, twigs, leaves, rice, and millet. Bubonic plague broke out at Kangso County, South Pyongan Province, several days after American aircraft had dropped fleas over the locality. Judging from various tests, the victims were infected by plague bacilli carried by the fleas. To prevent further infection, the corpses were cremated immediately. The homes of the deceased were thoroughly disinfected. During the process, the sanitation workers wore rubber clothing. In areas where diseases were discovered, cordons and signboards were immediately put up to stop traffic. This is one of the clams dropped by American aircraft in Korea. Owing to ignorance, a Korean woman took some of them home, and she and her husband ate them. They developed cholera the same day and died the following day. Examination showed that the clams were laden with cholera vibrios, which were the cause of death. In this district, many such clams were found by the Self-Preservation Corps and were destroyed by fire. This old woman lost her husband, Han Sang-kuk, and 2 grandchildren who died of cholera after American aircraft disseminated germs at Pyongyang. In a Korean laboratory, Korean and Chinese specialists make a joint examination of the insects dropped by the American aircraft. The insects are first put in a sterile test tube and ground with a rod. These are then cultured in meat broth and likewise on an agar plate. Within 24 hours, the germs multiply and a smear is made of them for staining. Under the microscope, the bacteriologists discover on these smears the gram-negative cholera vibrios, the same germ which had caused the death of Han Sang-kuk. Here the specialists are preparing to analyze the fleas dropped by the American aircraft. After grinding the fleas, the specialists prepare an emulsion which is later inoculated into a guinea pig whose reaction is closely watched. The guinea pig died in 3 days and was dissected. Part of the lymph gland and the intestine is taken out and subjected to close bacteriological examination. Under the microscope, the specialists discover the same type of plague bacilli which had caused bubonic plague in Korea. Many other different germs are isolated from various specimens of germ-infected insects and objects. These are various culture specimens of typhoid, paratyphoid, and dysentery bacilli isolated from the infected insects and objects. It is well known that there has been no bubonic plague or cholera in Korea for many years. The U.S. Navy Department report on infectious diseases in Korea, published in 1946, confirmed that there had been no case of bubonic plague in Korea for many years. Foreign Minister Baek Hong-yong of the Korean Democratic People's Republic made a statement protesting against U.S. germ warfare. He called upon the people of the whole world to check the atrocities of the American government and establish the international responsibility of those who order the use of germ weapons. Foreign Minister To Enlai of the People's Republic of China made a statement supporting Foreign Minister Baek Hong-yong's protest against American bacteriological warfare. He stated that if the people of the world do not resolutely curb this crime, the calamities befalling the peaceful Korean people today will befall the peaceful people of the world tomorrow. In their struggle for peace, the Korean people have endured much suffering and torture. Today, in the name of humanity, they resolutely demand that the atrocities committed by the American government be stopped. They make this demand not only for themselves, but also for the safety and peace of the whole world. I accuse, avenge my dead husband and grandson. All people cry for vengeance. They demand severe punishment for the ruthless American butchers. Despite the protests of the Korean government and the people of Korea, the American government continued to spread germ-laden insects and objects over these areas. The fighting Koreans have always known how to protect themselves in difficult conditions. Epidemic Prevention Corps have been formed. They come from different walks of life. Under the leadership of the Korean National Emergency Epidemic Prevention Committee, the epidemic prevention committees at different levels mobilize many able workers, equipment, and a health intelligence network. They have the power to combat bacteriological warfare. Burn all objects detrimental to human life disseminated by the American interventionists before they have a chance to spread germs. Meanwhile, epidemic prevention centers are set up at all thoroughfares to check inoculation certificates. People who have not been inoculated must receive shots so that no trouble may be caused by the negligence of a few. A disinfection and sanitation movement has been swiftly launched on a wide scale among the masses of the people. We must use every means to wipe out germs in order to prevent epidemics and protect the people. Despite the just warning of the people of China, Korea, and the whole world, American military aircraft invaded northeast China and disseminated bacteria. Since February 29, 1952, U.S. aircraft have continued to invade the territorial air of northeast China and spread bacteria in the many areas marked on the map. Ling Fung, Vice Chairman of the Northeast People's Government, and other leaders hurry to make an on-the-spot investigation. They hear the testimony of many eyewitnesses. Swarms of flies were found in a dazed condition at 10 degrees below 0 centigrade, obviously an abnormal phenomenon. A local inhabitant reports to a member of the Epidemic Prevention Corps. He says, "About noon on March the 4th, 6 American planes flew over in this direction, dropping 2 containers which burst in the air about 20 or 30 feet above the ground. We ran over to see and discovered a great number of beetles crawling on the ground. We thought this must be bacteriological warfare used by the Americans to kill us." Another villager says, "In such cold weather there are normally no such insects." A U.S.-made 4-compartment germ bomb was found in another peaceful village. Where germ-laden insects were dropped by U.S. aircraft, a mass campaign for disinfection and insect extermination was immediately launched. The infected objects spread by the American forces must be thoroughly destroyed. Various specimens from northeast China are received in this receiving room of the laboratory. These sterilized samples are sent to the entomological laboratory for identification. Here, many eminent specialists are making tests for identification. Professor Liu Chongluo, entomologist, studying a midge dropped by American aircraft in northeast China. Professor Feng Lanzhou, parasitologist, examining blue bottle flies dropped by American aircraft. Dr. Zhu Hongfu, entomologist, examining a type of field cricket dropped by American aircraft. Professor Lu Baoling, entomologist, examining spiders dropped by American aircraft. entomologists Professor Ma Shijun and Professor Chen Shixiang are studying entomyid flies dropped by American aircraft. In the bacteriological laboratory, the experts use aseptic technique to isolate virulent bacteria from the various infected insects. This white mouse is inoculated with a suspension of the material made from the ground spider. The mouse soon develops illness. The spleen of the dead mouse is found upon autopsy to be swollen. Professor Xie Shaowen, examining the slide, finds encapsulated anthrax bacilli on it. This is the report and conclusion signed by Professor Xie Shaowen, who isolated anthrax bacilli from the spiders dropped by American aircraft in northeast China. From this beetle, Tinus fur, dropped by American aircraft in northeast China, Professor Xie Shaowen has also isolated anthrax bacilli. This is the report and the conclusion which he endorses. Anthrax bacilli are injurious both for men and draft animals. At a conference of the scientists, Dr. Chen Shixiang reports the results of his examination of the infected insects. Professor Xie Shaowen makes a report on the bacteriological examination of these insects. The experts unanimously concur in the conclusions drawn by Professor Xie Shaowen and Dr. Chen Shixiang. Epidemiologist Dr. Fang Shishan also reports on the results of investigations into epidemics. After American aircraft disseminated bacteria in northeast China, deaths from encephalitis suddenly occurred. The brain of a fatal case is removed and small portions are sectioned. The main changes seen under the microscope are the appearance of many lymphocytes surrounding the blood vessels of the brain, the signs of encephalitis. American aircraft dropped large quantities of this type of soybean stalks and pods over the northern part of Korea. Professor Chiu Wei-fan, Chinese plant pathologist, makes a microscopic examination of this pod and finds conidiophores and conidia of the Cercospora species on it. This kind of fungus can survive through winter on soybean stalks, pods, and seeds, and continue to spread and cause damage to soybeans. Professor Chiu Wei-fan verifies that this type of soybean pod dropped by American aircraft is infected with purple spot fungus. This is a type of leaf dropped by American aircraft over the northern part of Korea, from which fungus causing anthracnose has been isolated. This fungus, if cultured and transplanted onto pears and apples, will cause rot. This fungus can also damage cotton seedlings by causing the growth of lesions on cotyledons and hypocotyls and roots until the seedlings wither and die. They also attack cotton bolls. This shows the germination of the fungi of anthracnose. Professor Chiu Wei-fan declares the tree leaves dropped by American aircraft carry fungi which cause pear rot, apple rot, and cotton anthracnose. This is a peach tree leaf dropped by American aircraft over northeast China, from which were isolated a certain type of fungus. This is a colony of the fungus grown in a culture medium. Apples which are inoculated with it rot within 5 days and show circular spots. These spots show many small black dots. Plant pathologist Professor Shen Qiyi conducts various experiments and examinations. A microscopic view of the pycnidia of this type of fungus and many spores that grow in it. These spores can continue to spread disease. Professor Shen Qiyi verifies that the ring spot fungus that attack pears and apples are isolated from the peach tree leaves dropped by American aircraft over northeast China. Disease-bearing corn kernels were discovered after American aircraft disseminated insects and objects over northeast China. Professor Shen Qiyi examines the corn kernel and discovers the black spots on these corn kernels are sori of a certain type of smut. Germination tests show that these spores germinate very rapidly. This Cercospora species has never before been found in China. Making a general summary at a meeting of experts, Professor Daifeng Lan, executive chairman of the Association of Chinese Phytopathologists, states positively that the American government has dropped disease-bearing soybean pods, corn kernels, tree leaves, and other parts of plants over Korea, East China, with the aim of destroying our crops. The protest issued by Zhou Enlai, Foreign Minister of the People's Republic of China, against the U.S. government's employment of bacteriological weapons to slaughter the Chinese people and its violation of China's territorial air. The statement reads, Now is the time for the peace-loving people of the world to rise and put an end to the maniacal crimes of the United States government. We are confident that human justice and peace will triumph. Democratic parties of China protest against the American government's use of bacteriological weapons. They call on peace-loving people of the world to rise and accuse the American government in defense of the dignity of mankind and world peace, and to bring the bacteriological war criminals to book. Chinese people throughout the country support Foreign Minister Zhou Enlai's protest against the United States' use of bacteriological warfare. In Peking and in the remote border regions, in towns and in the countryside, the wrathful voice of millions can be heard. But instead of giving up bacteriological warfare, the United States government has daily intensified its criminal activities. From February 29th to April the 20th, American aircraft in a total of 336 sorties intruded into northeast China and continued to disseminate bacteria over these areas. However, no destructive force could prevail over the broad masses of the Chinese people. Epidemic prevention teams were mobilized and moved into action immediately. We shall answer the vicious challenge of the United States government by action and resolutely smash bacteriological warfare. All manner of equipment, old and new, from spraying machines to fire extinguishers, is employed to spray and spread insecticides and disinfectant to annihilate the bacteria and germ-laden insects disseminated by United States aircraft. The United States government is naturally much interested in the criminal results of its bacterial war. It has therefore parachuted many secret agents into North Korea. This is Secret Agent Wang Qi, sent by an intelligence organization of the American aggressive forces in Korea. He carried with him a forged pass and other forged papers. Secret Agent Tang Chuseng, also captured by our side soon after he parachuted into our area. Airdrop Secret Agent Han Jung-yu, a Korean who, following the dictates of conscience, surrendered to the Korean government. All these airdrop secret agents carry parachutes, pistols, radio transmitters, medicine, and other military equipment. All confess that they had been sent to ascertain the effectiveness of bacterial weapons employed by the United States. The Commission of the International Association of Democratic Lawyers conducts on-the-spot investigations in Korea and northeast China. Just as the United States was employing bacteriological weapons against the Korean and Chinese people, the Commission of the International Association of Democratic Lawyers was at that time conducting investigations into all the criminal acts of the American forces in Korea in violation of international law. Hence, members of the Commission also became eyewitnesses of the germ war crimes committed. They conducted on-the-spot investigations on the facts of the employment of bacteriological weapons by the United States forces in Korea and northeast China. They examined many witnesses in Korea and northeast China and held discussion meetings with experts and witnesses. They conducted investigations and research over a long period and collected all the relevant materials and evidence. After the Commission completed its investigations, it issued a detailed report accusing the United States of criminal acts in Korea in violation of international law, and proving that the United States aircraft dropped insects carrying germs of contagious disease, and that many of the bacteria-laden insects found in China are similar to those found in Korea. The Commission for Investigating the American Crime of Germ Warfare, sent by the Chinese people, conducts on-the-spot investigations in Korea and northeast China. To make a thorough investigation into the American forces' criminal acts of germ warfare in Korea and Northeast China, the Chinese people dispatched their own commission to Korea and Northeast China to conduct on-the-spot investigations. Members of the commission include experts in the various branches of the natural sciences, experts in international law, and representatives of people's organizations, literary and art workers, and journalists. This is part of the commission conducting on-the-spot investigations in Korea. The Northeast Subcommission for Investigating the American Crime of Germ Warfare, another group of the Commission, conducts on-the-spot investigations in various localities in Northeast China. Pao Li Jun, a primary school student, tells how U.S. germ warfare killed her little sister. She demands vengeance. This mother, whose child was killed in the same way, bitterly demands, punish the U.S. butchers. People signed letters addressed to the Commission protesting against the inhuman crimes of the United States. Accuse, we must accuse. For the sake of our next generation, we must carry on the fight to the very end. Security and a peaceful life are the inviolable rights of mankind. The Commission returns to Peking. Li Chuan, head of the Commission, makes a report at a meeting. She says, the members of the Commission went to Korea and Northeast China in separate groups to carry out an on-the-spot investigation of the facts on the dissemination of deadly bacteria by the U.S. interventionists. The evidence we have gathered proves that the American forces are conducting large-scale bacteriological warfare in Korea and Northeast China. Liao Chengzhi, Vice Chairman of the Commission, also testifies that the U.S. government is waging germ warfare. He declares that the best Korean and Chinese scientists and doctors are conducting extremely effective anti-epidemic work. They now have complete control over the bacteria disseminated by the U.S. government. In the report of Chen Qiyuan, head of the Northeast Subcommission, it is proved that the American government has systematically employed bacteriological weapons on a large scale in their aggressive activities in China's northeast. Another member of the Commission, Li Dong'an, specialist in tropical diseases and president of the Chinese Union Medical College, also speaks at the meeting. Yan Jingqing, member of the Commission, public health specialist. Wang Zizong, member of the Commission, a Christian pastor. Mei Ruao, member of the Commission, international law expert. Yan Renying, member of the Commission, specialist in clinical medicine. Other experts speak in the meeting. They unanimously point out the Endicott, chairman of the Canadian Peace Congress, arrives in Northeast China to conduct investigations. Endicott visits the display room showing evidence of the American crime of germ warfare in Mukden. He also examines witnesses, peasants, students, merchants, and hears their accounts of how they personally saw American aircraft drop germ bombs, germ-laden insects, and other infected objects. Endicott says he is deeply impressed by the Chinese people's resolute will to struggle against germ warfare. Every honest person who has a sense of justice cannot but be shocked by the barbarous deeds of the U.S. government. At a press conference, Endicott states,
I came to the Northeast and interviewed the public health authorities and people of all walks of life. I have seen all kinds of incriminating evidence of American germ warfare. After seeing all this evidence, I know that the American government has carried out large-scale germ warfare on the Chinese mainland. No matter whether the American government dares not to admit it, no matter whether the British Foreign Office spokesman helps to deny it, the fact is that anyone who is just and not prejudiced and who has seen the evidence must admit the fact of germ warfare.
U.S. Airmen Kenneth L. Enoch and John S. Quinn are interrogated by the Joint Interrogation Group of Korean and Chinese specialists and news correspondents. On January 13, 1952, Korean and Chinese forces shot down a U.S. military aircraft in Korea and captured its navigator and pilot. They voluntarily confessed that the U.S. government was waging germ warfare and that they personally had dropped germ bombs. To expose this fact to the whole world, the Korean and Chinese people formed the Joint Interrogation Group of Korean and Chinese specialists and news correspondents. This group arrived at a prisoner of war camp somewhere in Korea and proceeded with the interrogation of the two captured airmen. Wilfred Burchett, correspondent of the Paris Soir, also joined in the work of the group by invitation. This prisoner of war being interrogated is Kenneth Lloyd Enoch, First Lieutenant, Navigator of the 3rd Bomb Wing, 3rd Group, 8th Squadron of the United States 5th Air Force. This is Enoch's identification certificate. During the interrogation, the correspondents and specialists, deeply aware of their responsibility to mankind and to principles of human justice, gravely go about their work of interrogating Enoch with systematic thoroughness. They recognize the importance of this evidence on the United States government's crime of germ warfare, because the testimony comes from none other than the very flyers of the U.S. Air Force who themselves dropped the germ bombs. The second prisoner of war being interrogated is John Silas Quinn, First Lieutenant, Pilot of the 3rd Bomb Wing, 3rd Group, 8th Squadron of the U.S. 5th Air Force. This is Quinn's identification certificate. Quinn also gives a factual account of how he dropped bacteriological bombs over Korea. This testimony has been carefully recorded to be made known to the whole world. Urged by their own conscience, Enoch and Quinn made voluntary confessions of their part in American bacteriological warfare and told what they knew about it. The depositions are in their handwriting and signed with their names. Yves Farge, president of the French National Peace Committee, talks with captured U.S. airmen in Korea. In the presence of this just and upright man, Quinn, captured U.S. airman, said, "I am a Catholic. When I became convinced that my testimony would benefit the people of the United States as well as the rest of the world, that I am not testifying against the people of the United States, but only against a handful of insane people who call themselves Americans, I voluntarily admitted my part in germ warfare and what I knew about it. My conscience demanded that I speak out. At no time have I been treated in any way but kindly." The people of China and Korea have sufficient confidence and strength to crush the bacteriological warfare launched by the American government. In Korea, a widespread educational campaign has been launched to prevent epidemic diseases and to disseminate scientific knowledge with which to combat bacteriological warfare. More powerful epidemic prevention corps are set up. The embattled people of Korea are strong and have unshaken confidence in victory. For the safety of the motherland and mankind, they will not allow the bacteria disseminated by the United States to spread. Many young people have thrown themselves wholeheartedly into the struggle. Rush medicines to the front, the cities, the countryside, and the mines. The people's heroes of Korea are inoculated to prevent infection by the bacteria disseminated by the United States. They will continue their courageous fight. The Chinese people's heroes at the Korean front are given similar inoculations. They will continue their courageous fight. We must protect the lives of our children. We must protect the lives of all peoples. They must not fall victim to U.S. bacteria. Nor will the American prisoners of war be infected by bacteria. While the United States government, in violation of international law, uses every means of mass slaughter against the Chinese and Korean prisoners of war, our side has consistently adhered to international law and carried out a policy of good treatment towards the prisoners of war. The brave and determined Korean people, loving labor and cleanliness, will undoubtedly be able to defend their right to a free life and will defeat their enemy. In order that our children may enjoy a beautiful and happy life, we must use every means to defeat U.S. germ warfare. The heroic Korean people, under the leadership of General Kim Il-sung, fighting side by side with the Chinese people's volunteers, will resolutely crush U.S. bacteriological warfare. Chinese medical and health workers in all parts of the country have mobilized to combat U.S. bacteriological warfare. They are inspired with a spirit of patriotism and internationalism. They demand enthusiastically to participate in the struggle against bacteriological warfare. Scientists who honor the name of Pasteur, the bacteriologist who served mankind, and who despise the bacteriological war criminals of America, have taken action. In order to defend the dignity of science and world peace, they resolutely demand to participate in the fight against bacteriological warfare. They give their pledge in solemn words. They are determined to exert their strongest efforts in carrying out epidemic prevention and health work despite all difficulties, and thus defeat the germ war criminals who have prostituted science. They transform their indignation into strength and organize this great strength. They pledge to be faithful children of the motherland and fight to the end for the security of their people and the victory of world peace. Organized medical workers set out for the battlefront against bacteriological warfare. Under the leadership of the People's Government, the determined and well-equipped Epidemic Prevention Corps will undoubtedly succeed in defending their own people and all mankind and crushing the sinister threat of the U.S. government. Everyone goes to his own post, fearing neither danger nor difficulty. Holding high the banner of victory, they advance along the road of revolutionary humanitarianism. These epidemic prevention units are continually being reinforced, thus strengthening our defense against bacteriological warfare. The whole country will be able to throw back the disease offensive launched by the U.S. government. All key points of communications are put under strict control and closely guarded. These tasks are accomplished with greatest possible speed. In some areas where U.S. forces dropped infected insects and objects, airplanes equipped with spraying apparatus are called in to supplement the prevention work on the ground. The Korean and Chinese peoples have, with effective thoroughness, brought under control the germs disseminated by the American forces and curbed the spread of disease. However, we must heighten our vigilance until the criminal acts of the U.S. forces have been finally shattered. In response to the call of the People's Government and under its leadership, all forces have been mobilized to launch a nationwide campaign of cleaning and sanitation. To improve sanitation, all garbage must be cleared away so as to keep our free land always clean and our peaceful people always healthy and happy. Indignation mounted swiftly both in Korea and China against the bacteriological warfare waged by the American government. Angry protests rise from every part of Korea. The Korean people are unconquerable. They will never allow the American imperialists to rob them of their land and liberty, which were won at the cost of the blood of Korean martyrs and the sufferings of Korean widows and orphans. With a common boundary and united for a common goal, the peoples of China and Korea rely on each other and share all hardships in the struggle for peace. Confronted today with the atrocities committed by the U.S. government, they realize all the more clearly that they must carry on an even more determined struggle against the common enemy who will stop at nothing. We pledge that we will not stop striving till the goal is attained. Educated in the teachings of Mao Zedong, the Chinese people are tempered like steel in their courageous and protracted revolutionary struggle. Distinguishing clearly between friend and foe, they are fully conscious of their noble responsibility in the fight for world peace. Fired with wrath, the Chinese people will stand shoulder to shoulder with the peace-loving people of the world to deal smashing blows at the U.S. bacteriological war criminals. Protests against the crime of the U.S. government in waging bacteriological warfare come from all corners of the world. In Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Bulgaria, Poland, the Soviet Union, and other countries, the people hold mass demonstrations or protest meetings to oppose U.S. bacteriological warfare. Newspapers concerned for justice in the United States expose their government's crime. And newspapers which print the truth in Britain, France, India, Australia, and other countries publish the facts about American bacteriological warfare in Korea and Northeast China. They raise a common voice of condemnation against this vicious act of the United States government. In response to the call of the World Peace Council, scientists of various countries formed the International Scientific Commission and came to China and Korea to make on-the-spot investigations. The International Scientific Commission arrived in Peking on June 21st. Its members are all world-famous and impartial authorities from the scientific circles of various countries. The Chinese people give a warm welcome to the members of the Commission who have come to make objective and strict observations on the spot. The first to step off the plane is Dr. Andrea Andrean, Director of the Central Clinical Laboratory of the Hospitals Board of the City of Stockholm. The second is Dr. N.N. Zhukov-Berezhnikov, Academician and Vice President of the Soviet Academy of Medicine. Next comes Professor Jean Malter, Director of the Laboratory of Animal Physiology of the National College of Agriculture, Grignon, France. This is Dr. Oliviero Olivo of Italy, Professor of Human Anatomy in the Faculty of Medicine of the University of Bologna. The last is Dr. Joseph Needham of the United Kingdom, Fellow of the Royal Society, Radio and Biochemistry of the University of Cambridge. Dr. and Mrs. Samuel B. Pessoa come from Brazil. Dr. Pessoa is Professor of Parasitology at the University of São Paulo. Referring to a large mass of data and the results of research by specialists, Bai Xiqing, Vice Director of the Public Health Department of the Northeast People's Government, reports to the Commission the case of the discovery of more than 700 dead or dying voles of a peculiar species in Gannan County, Heilongjiang Province, on the morning of April the 5th, after an intrusion by U.S. aircraft during the night. The members of the Commission visit the China Medical College at Mukden to investigate the results of laboratory examination of these voles. Members of the Commission examined carefully the cultural and biochemical characteristics of the plague bacilli isolated from the bodies of these voles dropped by the U.S. aircraft. The members examined the liver of a guinea pig which died after injection with the plague bacilli taken from the voles. The members studied under the microscope the smear made from the liver. The bipolar staining oval bacteria among the liver cells are the plague bacilli. Members of the Commission checked the results of the various experiments. They unanimously confirmed that the voles dropped by U.S. aircraft were infected with plague bacilli. Here is an exhibition of voles which naturally inhabit the Northeast, along with those dropped by U.S. aircraft at Ganan. Here are two voles dropped by the U.S. aircraft at Ganan. Their tails are shorter and there are other differences from those indigenous to the Northeast. The members make a careful comparison of these two kinds of voles and note their differences. It is well known that voles are not frequenters of human habitations. Normally, in Northeast China, they only make their appearance in the field after May. Furthermore, there has never been a case of plague in the district of Ganan. Commission members make close studies and compare these two types of voles. Commission members also make personal visits to the places in Ganan where such voles were discovered and make on-the-spot investigations. They question the local residents, who all tell the same story. On that day, the local residents discovered nothing but these short-tailed, dead or dying voles in the fields, inside or outside the houses, in the wells, or in the vegetable cellars. The members examined these places very closely, carefully considering all possibilities as to where the voles might have come from. Members then listened to a report made by the health authorities of the Northeast on the dropping of bacteriological bombs by U.S. aircraft in Quandian County. Many local residents are invited to testify. This is the owner of a shop in the city of Quandian who witnessed the dropping of a germ bomb by the U.S. aircraft outside the eastern city gate of Quandian. This is a student of the Quandian Middle School who later discovered that bomb together with many feathers, black flies, and spiders in the vicinity of the bomb crater. Commission members listened to a report made by Professor Zhang Naicu, bacteriologist, on the isolation of anthrax bacilli from the feathers. Dr. Xin Jun, bacteriologist, tells the Commission that anthrax bacilli were also isolated from the anthomyid flies and wolf spiders. Dr. Xin also examined 3,000 control flies of various types, native to Northeast China, and found no anthrax bacilli on any of them. This species of anthomyid fly discovered in Quandian has never been recorded in China before. This is one of the wolf spiders from which anthrax bacilli were isolated. It was also found abnormally on cold, snow-covered ground. These bomb fragments and this bomb axis were collected from where the bombs exploded in Quandian. They have been studied and analyzed by many experts of the Academia Sinica. At the meeting, Dr. Qian Sanqiang, head of the Modern Physics Research Institute, Academia Sinica, delivers a report on the results of research into the material evidence and the arguments on which the conclusion was based. The committee members make a careful study of the material evidence. The bomb fragments are very thin and brittle. They break easily on contact with the ground, and they are not easily discovered. Obviously, these are not ordinary explosive bombs, but bombs designed for dropping insects. Analysis and research lead the experts to believe that the calcareous type of germ bombs used by the United States are developed from the porcelain germ bomb invented by the Japanese germ war criminal Shiro Ishii. Dr. Chen is holding the so-called Ishii bomb for reporting to committee members on the results of the research and the arguments. Committee members also studied the four-compartment insect bomb dropped by U.S. aircraft. This type of bomb carries a small propeller-shaped time fuse. The bomb case splits into two parts before reaching the ground and releases the insects contained in it. Committee members also hear reports on how cases of respiratory anthrax and hemorrhagic meningitis suddenly broke out after U.S. aircraft disseminated feathers, tiny beetles, and houseflies. Such diseases had never before occurred in Northeast China. Professor Lu Baoling, entomologist, says the tinus fur is normally a pest found in stored grain and dry stuff. However, after the flight of U.S. aircraft over the Liaoyang area, in the open fields, large quantities of the tainted beetles were found. This was ecologically most unusual. Professor Wu Jiadong, pathologist, makes a detailed report on the autopsy of 5 cases. He proves that these victims were infected with anthrax through the respiratory passages. This type of disease has never before been recorded in Northeast China. Commission members carefully examined the pathological specimen made by Professor Wu Jiadong. This is the lung of the deceased Wang Ziping. The lymphatic gland at the upper right part of the lung is swollen. The dark-colored patch indicates hemorrhagic inflammation. The commission members carefully studied this specimen and some of the experimental data. This is the brain of the deceased Mrs. Wei. There is diffuse bleeding under the meninges. She died of a disease contracted while taking part in the work of exterminating the tainted beetles brought by American aircraft. The commission members carefully studied this specimen and many other experimental data. This is the husband of schoolteacher Wang Shuzhi, who died of hemorrhagic meningitis caused by anthrax bacillus. He tells the commission members that his wife was in good health before the deadly disease attacked her. Professor Zheng Geng, veterinary bacteriologist, says the biological, biochemical, and morphological characteristics of the anthrax bacilli isolated from the beetle Tinus fur, houseflies, anthomiid flies, spiders, and feathers dropped by American aircraft, and those isolated from the fatal cases are identical. This is most unusual. The commission members visit the bacteriological laboratory of the Mukden Epidemic Prevention Station to conduct an examination into the problem of anthrax. This is a microscopic view of the surface of the colony of anthrax bacilli as observed by committee members. The smear made from the abdominal cavity of a guinea pig shows encapsulated anthrax bacilli as observed by commission members. The commission members watched Professor Zheng Geng perform an autopsy on a dead guinea pig inoculated with anthrax bacilli isolated from the fatal cases. Dr. Xin Jun performs the anthrax bacilli precipitation test. The commission members check the results of the various tests once more and unanimously come to the conclusion that the bacteria isolated from the insects and feathers dropped by American aircraft and those isolated from the tissue of the dead bodies are the same, anthrax bacilli. After further on-the-spot investigations in Korea, the International Scientific Commission conducts an interrogation of captured U.S. flyers. The members of the commission are now interrogating prisoner of war Kenneth L. Enoch of the U.S. Air Force.
For germ warfare, my knowledge about it, I had a lecture at Iwakuni, Japan on 25th of August, 1951, given at the ground school by Mr. Wilson, a civilian. He lectured on the ways and means of waging bacteriological warfare, also on the ways of protecting yourself against it. Mr. Wilson told us that the lecture was quite secret. We had no idea on using bacteriological warfare at that time. However, we might sometime, and not to divulge its contents to anyone. He discussed 3 different ways to employ germ warfare. Firstly, by dropping germs by themselves, or secondly, by dropping germs with insects, or thirdly, by dropping animals to carry the germs and the insects. They should be employed at low airspeeds and low altitudes to avoid damage to the insects. I'd say, as I recall, 200 miles per hour and 500 feet altitude was the altitude and airspeed that we employed.
On the details of what happened after he returned from a germ war mission, Enoch says,
At debriefing, we reported to the enlisted man from intelligence that we had dropped 2 500-pound duds, which were actually the germ bombs, at Gwangju, and we reported the 8 good 500-pound bombs
on the railway and highway north of Gwangju. This is for secrecy, of course, to keep unauthorized personnel and intelligence and on the crew from knowing the true portent of the mission. On the 10th of January, I was again scheduled on the same aircraft with the same crew, same mission and same time. It was 0300 takeoff on the 11th of January, 1952.
The Commission now interrogates the captured U.S. airman Paul R. Niss. Niss is a first lieutenant, pilot of the 12th Fighter Bomber Squadron, 18th Fighter Bomber Group of the U.S. Air Force. Describing the conduct of bacteriological warfare by the U.S. Air Force, he says,
I had a total of 26 missions when I was shot down. I was shot down on my 27th mission, the 31st of May, 1952, near Namsi, that is close to Sinanju. One other thing that I forgot to mention on the germ bombs that we could tell them they were germ bombs from an ordinary bomb was the loading time. The germ bombs were loaded 15 minutes before our mission, while ordinarily our aircraft were loaded 2 hours or more before a mission. My germ mission took place on the 27th of March, 1952, and it was a VT germ mission. 27th March, yes, 1952. As I said, at 6:45, I went out to my airplane to check it over. As I was out there, I noticed the men loading the bombs on it. And they were in the uniforms as he had described them to us, in the white fatigues, the mask, and the gloves. These men took the bombs out of this closed truck and loaded them by hand. Normally, they've got a jack that they jack them up with. These bombs were loaded by hand.
Niss describes his feelings after dropping the germ bombs.
After the debriefing with Captain McLaughlin, we went to our shower room and took a shower. In the shower, I made the remark to Captain Thomas at the time that the shower may clean my body, but my soul will never be clean after such an incident. I mean, after committing such an act.
Appearing before the Commission now is U.S. Air Force flyer Floyd Bryant O'Neill. O'Neill is a second lieutenant, pilot of the 67th Fighter Bomber Squadron, 18th Fighter Bomber Group, U.S. Air Force. He says,
the instructions which I have received in regard to bacteriological warfare consisted of 2 lectures. One lecture was given at Luke Air Force Base, which is in the United States, at Phoenix, Arizona, on December the 1st, 1951. This was a short lecture lasting only 30 minutes. The second lecture was given at K-46, the advanced base of the 18th Fighter Bomber Group in Korea here. This lecture was given on the 22nd of January, 1952. This lecture was much more complete on the bacteriological weapons which we would be using. This lecture lasted for approximately 2 hours. Then the only other instruction I received, of course, was the order to carry out my germ warfare mission.
What did you feel like? What was your state of mind when you carried out this germ warfare mission?
Frankly, I was, I think, the most nervous I've ever been in my life. I also felt like it was rather a funeral rather than a usual mission. I know I was wondering myself why on earth we were using this terrible weapon in Korea, even while the peace talks were going on at Kaesong, when the war was practically stopped.
O'Neill is deeply moved as he talks about his past participation in germ warfare and his own future. He says,
When I think of my future, when I think of someday, though I'm not married yet, I intend to be, when my son asks me what I did in Korea, how can I tell him that I came over here and dropped germ bombs on people, destroying them, bringing death and destruction? How can I go back and face my family in a civilized world? How can I tell them these things, that I'm a criminal in the eyes of humanity? They are my flesh and blood. It's the most difficult thing to really give a man's feelings a vocal expression.
I can't try. I can only tell you somewhat of how I feel.
The Commission now interrogates prisoner of war John Quinn of the U.S. Air Force.
The bombs that I dropped were carried, on both occasions, were carried on the wing. The airplane was guarded, as I've recorded in my statement, and we were told that the bombs had been checked. I took part in germ warfare, as far as I know, at the very beginning. At the time I took part in it, germ bombs were referred to as duds.
And ladies and gentlemen, I say that with a great deal of emotion. Today, August the 3rd, my wife is giving birth to a baby. The people that are responsible for germ warfare threaten that child's life before it's born. They threaten not only with their germ bombs, but by using germ bombs, they carelessly shake an already very unstable world situation. They must be stopped. And I think we can do a lot by outlawing the specter of germ warfare now.
The massive evidence on the U.S. government's conduct of bacteriological warfare is overwhelming. The proof is ironclad and cannot be refuted. The International Scientific Commission conducted on-the-spot investigations in Korea and China for more than 2 months. They spent a further 3 weeks in studying the materials collected, carrying out research work and holding discussion meetings. Following this, the Commission prepared the report on the investigation of the facts concerning bacterial warfare in Korea and China in the French, English, Russian, and Chinese languages. In the preamble of the report, it is stated that since the peoples of the world had long manifested their disapproval and indeed detestation of such methods of war, the gravity of the situation was well understood. This was the reason for the formation of an international scientific commission which should examine the evidence in the field. The members of the commission, who, conscious of their responsibility, made every effort to free themselves from preconceived ideas, have carried out their investigations according to the strictest scientific principles known to them. In the conclusion of the report, it is stated that the Commission has come to the following conclusions. The peoples of Korea and China have indeed been the objective of bacteriological weapons. These have been employed by units of the USA Armed Forces using a great variety of different methods for the purpose, some of which seem to be developments of those applied by the Japanese Army during the Second World War. The Commission reached these conclusions passing from one logical step to another. It did so reluctantly, because its members had not been disposed to believe that such an inhuman technique could have been put into execution in the face of its universal condemnation by the peoples of the nations. It is now for all peoples to redouble their efforts to preserve the world from war and prevent the discoveries of science being used for the destruction of humanity. The ceremony at which members of the International Scientific Commission signed the report takes place on August 31st, 1952, in the presence of Guo Mo and many scientists in this historic hall of the Chinese People's Committee for World Peace. Dr. Andrea Andrean of Sweden, expert on clinical and laboratory medicine, signs. Professor Jean Malter of France, animal physiologist and biologist, signs. Dr. Joseph Needham of the United Kingdom, Fellow of the Royal Society, biochemist and embryologist, signs. Dr. Oliviero Olivo of Italy, medical expert, biologist and anatomist, signs. Dr. Samuel B. Pessoa of Brazil, parasitologist, entomologist and medical expert, signs. Dr. N.N. Zhukov-Berezhnikov of the Soviet Union, bacteriologist, epidemiologist and vice president of the Soviet Academy of Medicine, signs. The historic signatures of the members of the International Scientific Commission. After the members of the International Scientific Commission have signed their names, Guo Mo, President of the Chinese People's Committee for World Peace, and President of the Academy of Sciences of China, speaks. He tells the members of the Commission to save peace, to save humanity, and to save science. You have overcome all kinds of difficulties and have accomplished a serious task. We, the Chinese people, support you wholeheartedly and are grateful to you. We believe that the Korean people and all righteous people the world over will also support you and be grateful to you. Your accomplishment will go down in the glorious pages of human history. Your honor shall last forever. Your selfless spirit is inspiring. In the interests of truth and justice, great scientists never yield to violence. Glory shall forever belong to those who defend truth and justice. Professor Malter of France speaks on behalf of the Commission. He says, a few months ago at Oslo, Komoro, through the Executive Committee of the World Peace Council, made known in forceful terms that China and Korea had been attacked by bacteriological weapons. We have been honored by being considered scientists competent to give impartial testimony. We come from distant lands. We have been deeply conscious of the honor accorded us, and at the same time we feel the considerable responsibility placed on our shoulders. We have made our investigation with the sole determination of establishing the exact truth. Our task was to prove or disprove U.S. germ warfare. We hope the Chinese and Korean scientists will now pardon us that at times we were skeptical and groping in our efforts to get at the bottom of things. They have well understood that it is because we wish really to get at the truth, and it is because we took such precautions that we feel today in a stronger position to speak the truth. Finally, Professor Malter declared, we have said, here is the truth. It is written in this book which we sign. Not only have we stated our conviction, but we have furthermore put our signatures to it, and we can reaffirm it. Professor Malter added with emphasis,
nous pouvons la redire, la Corée et la Chine ont été cruellement attaquées par l'arme bactériologique, et ce sont des unités USA qui en sont coupables.
Professor Malter says, we can repeat it. Korea and China have been cruelly attacked by bacteriological weapons, and it is the forces of the United States which are guilty. We will affirm this truth before the world. It is certainly your wish that with the aggression denounced and the aggressors unmasked, the peoples will now do everything necessary either to make those who are guilty understand the immensity of their crime and make them desist, or else, if they do not wish to give up, to force them to stop this hateful war. As scientists, we are devoted to the work of science. When you ask if bacteriological war has happened or not, we have, alas, to confirm that it has happened. We have put this in writing, and we give this affirmation to the peoples who will do the rest. We count on them to do the rest. From the moment the people know the contents of this report, from that moment it carries the hope that the people will do what is necessary in order to curb the crime. Let us recall the appeal against bacteriological warfare which the World Peace Council Executive Bureau addressed on April the 1st, 1952 to men and women of the world. We call on all peoples of the world to press their governments with the aim of securing that this International Convention of June 17, 1925, forbidding the use of asphyxiating gases and bacteriological weapons, be signed, ratified, and observed by every state without exception. We call upon them likewise to act decisively to secure that those guilty of employing this most cowardly and monstrous of all weapons be brought as war criminals before a competent tribunal. Humanity must rise to defend itself against bacteriological warfare. Humanity must rise to defend itself against bacteriological warfare. Humanity must rise to defend itself against bacteriological warfare. Peace, all for peace. Peace must be saved. Peace will certainly triumph.